In this video, we're going to set up push notifications in React Native. So we're going to use the React Native push notifications library to set up notifications in both Android and iOS. So basically in our application, if the user's logged in, but they're not actually on the application, they're in an inactive state. So if one person sends a message to the other person, but they're in an inactive state, we want to set up a push notification such that they can see the message. Now there's a couple of nuances with setting that up. The documentation, it's pretty good, but it's just, there's a couple of details in it for iOS that makes it a little tricky. So for example, iOS by default, it shuts off the socket connections when you go inactive. So we use a timer, background timer library to be able to detect or account for that. And then we set up, the notifications for both iOS and Android. So if you want to set that up, check out this video. Let's do a demonstration of the push notifications. So on the left-hand side, I'm logged in as John Pink, and on the right-hand side, on the iPhone emulator, I'm logged in as Larry Smith. So if I go to the home page, so I'm no longer on the application. You'll see that that's changed to active 4 hours ago. That's just hard-coded. But what we're working on is the push notifications. So I'm going to say, "Hi, John," send him a message. And then you can see you get this push notification on the Android. And then when you click on that, you see that you get that message there. And likewise, if I am going to be off the Apple application, I can still see, I can send a message. I can say, "Hi, Larry," send him a message there. And then you see that you get this nice notification here, and that preserves the chat. So let's see how we can build this out. So first things first, we need to get a package. So we need to install the React Native push notification package. And you can copy the code that I'm going to show here, but there's a few nuances to it. And iOS has a few extra steps. So we also need to have the same package, but /push notification iOS. So if I just come to Visual Studio Code, and what I might do is just open up the package.json just to show some of the dependencies here. So actually I might just get up the changes and then open this package.json here like this. So you'll need to install React Native Community push notifications. We also need React Native background timer because Android lets you do some background stuff. So when the app's not open, but iOS doesn't. So we'll need a package for that. And that's the React-Native-background timer package. And then the React Native push notifications. And then I just got a couple of these types. So the same package, but the types there. So after you install that, you'll need to go into the iOS folder and do a pod install. And after you do that, you can go through the documentations, but there's a couple of extra steps so that aren't shown in the documentation. So this video will be handy to pick up on some of those. So basically, you go to the build Gradle file, and that's in the Android folder, the build Gradle folder. And we'll start off by trying to get the React Native notifications going. So you need to have this Google Play Services version, and plus just means the latest version, and then 21.1.0 is of Firebase. Now we're not actually using Firebase, but because this is built on Google, I think there's some Google Analytics stuff related to Firebase, so you just need to have that there. And then we go to the Android manifest file in the source folder in app in Android, in the main folder there. And then what we need to do is we just need to add a couple of user permissions for the phone to have access to the internet and to vibrate. And then we also just copy and paste this. This is just all from the documentation. You just copy and paste this React Native push notification stuff in here. So this will take care of things for Android. So then what we want to do is we're using this color here as white. So we'll just come to the colors.xml file in the values here. And then we'll just go ahead and get that resource there. Now that takes care of Android. iOS is a little different. So basically you have to open up Xcode, and you have to open up one of the files in Xcode. And if you go to the iOS folder, there's this Facebook Messenger.xcw workspace, and then you have this sort of stuff in here that we get updating, but you can actually just right click and reveal it in find in folder, and then you can open it up in Xcode. So if you open up Xcode, at the top here, we've got this Facebook Messenger folder, and you go to this signing and capabilities tab, and you just click on add capability, and then you can add the background modes, and then you click remote notifications. And then you can also do the same thing and get the push notifications. And then you can come to the app delegate file. And then you can just add this user notification snippet here and have this interface here. So you just copy that from the documentation or from GitHub, and that app delegate files here. So there's a .h file and there's also a .m file. So you come to the .m file, and then you can just copy and paste some stuff in here as well. So we just copied and pasted this snippet here and some of this this code here. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So now we've installed things, and remember you need to do a pod install from the iOS folder in addition to the installations of the packages. And after we've set that up, we can actually start to create or register our code and configure it. So we come to the index file, and it's important you do this in the index file because it needs to be outside the scope of any lifecycle methods that are happening. So outside of the component. So basically in the index.js file here, and I might just collapse a few things here to make the code a bit bigger. Essentially what we want to do is we just want to import the push notification and also the push notification iOS. And then we can use the push notification, and then we can configure it. And then it takes a configuration object, and it has an onRegister method, which we're just console logging out the token from the callback, which isn't important. We have this onNotification, which has a callback where you get the notification. And there's a bit of an extra thing here for iOS because this package here sort of interacts and builds off this one here, but there's some extra configuration in the iOS. So you just need to have this when you finish the notification, it's received. you need to explicitly push the notification and fetch the result, which there's no data here, but give it to the iOS device. So essentially, iOS stuff has more extra permissions and stuff like that. Just needs some, this extra line here to let the device know that a notification is received. And then you need this channel ID. I've just put channel ID 1. This could be whatever you want as a string. And there just needs to be a way to identify that. These permissions are for Apple or iOS. So we're giving it some sound on iOS and all these sorts of things here. As you start to notice, iOS, the rules are a little stricter than Android. So you just have to do a couple extra stuff. Pop initial notification, I set that to true. And this is all from the documentation. It's just copying and pasting basically. And then request permissions. So on iOS, you actually need to request permissions to accept that you can receive notifications. So if you're on the iOS device, you just set that to iOS. So then basically what we got here is we have this friends context file here. So this is where we have our conversations and our messages. I think I was using, in the previous video, I set up the conversation when you actually click on the conversation. So I've just made some adjustments to move it to the friends context. So if you look at the friends context here, you can see, if we go to the top here, we got the friends, the conversations and the messages here. So what I've done is I've just added a friend, and I've also added 2 methods here. So send a message and set a friend. So when you click on a conversation, from the particular conversation you're in, we want to be able to say, oh, okay, that's where we can know that we've got a particular friend selected. And then we can also send a message from there and then handle this all in this friends section. So potentially I could have called this, instead of friends context, probably could have called this chat context. But chat is related to friends, so hopefully it's not too unclear or anything like that in terms of the naming. So yeah, I just added these to the interface here. So the send message, you want obviously the message, the text. And then I also have the conversation ID, which we're getting from the particular room that we're clicked on. So that's getting passed in. And then we're setting a friend here. That's just a setter for an active friend. We need to cast empty object and set it as an active friend to keep TypeScript happy here. And then we just add in those, those signatures there for the context. Then we just add some state for the friend and setting the friend, and also the conversations, which we've moved from the other file. And then we have this use effect hook here. So we have conversations. If the conversation's length is greater than 0, we'll just return. We also need to have as dependencies the chat socket, because we want to be listening for the get all conversations. And that returns all of the conversations, and then we can set the conversations to all of the conversations. And then on cleanup, we just turn off that listener there. And then we have another use effect hook. So it's listening for the new messages. And then we're just looking for the chat socket, or we're listening to the chat socket to detect any changes, although it should only change if you log in again. Now, to a different account, that is, as well. This is where we can just set the messages we get back. And then on Android, we have this push notification where we need to create a channel, and this channel ID is the same as what we've called it here. This can be called whatever you want. It just needs to be a string. I've just called it the string 1. The channel name here, that's sort of optional, I think. And then after you've created the channel, so this will only happen once. So if it's already created, it will just, it's sort of like a singleton or something like that. It will just return the channel. And then we have this local notification. So basically we just attach the message there. So we can say, okay, if it's iOS, we have to use the iOS library, where you can just call this add notification. And then instead of channel ID, it takes ID. And then we've just sort of attached the message here. So the title probably could be based off the user as well. We have that data anyway, so we could just put that in there. But I'm not too concerned about that at the moment. And then we'll just turn off the socket on cleanup. Then we'll have another use effect here with the chat socket is active and is logged in as dependencies. So if you're not logged in or you're active, it's going to just return. So it's not going to do anything. But if you are logged in but you're not active, so your app's open but you're logged in but you're on a different doing something else on your phone, then in that case, this is where we need to use the background timer. And then I can run a background timer, and every 3 seconds we can emit to the server that we're still there, and that will keep the server alive, and then they'll allow for messages to be received on iOS, because on iOS by default it shuts off the sockets when you are not active. So this is sort of a hack to get around that. And then we can return the background timer and stop that on cleanup. So just to go to Visual Studio Code, in the chat gateway, I've just created a very simple method here. So we have this @subscribe message ping, and it's literally doing nothing. All it's doing is just keeping the connection alive. So it's just pinging for that. So if I return back to Visual Studio Code here, if I go to the friend.tsx file, basically what I can do is I can import the friend's context, which we've just sort of created or extended on. And we can use that set friend methods. So basically, whenever is active changes, we can set the friend to the particular friend that we're on. So the friend's passed into the friends list, loop through all those, and for every friend it renders a friend, and we can set that data whenever is active changes. And that means we can use that data. So let's come to the index file, and you can see up here it's from the chat folder, the chat screen. So essentially we just want to, when you click on a button, we essentially just want to say, okay, well, we can just send the message, and then that will go to our context, because in the chat page, so we're in a particular chat room, we have access to the text that we're about to send, and we also have access to the conversation ID. So we put in the text and we get the conversation ID. If we have that, then that calls the send message